Okay, welcome back. Now we're going to take a look at some other Native American myths that are very similar to the Navajo creation myth, or at least have some things in common with them. We definitely don't want to assume that they're all exactly identical, but I think we'll kind of see some similarities as we go. So let's take a look. We'll start off in the same area as the Navajo, which is the American Southwest, the area of the Colorado and Arizona rivers. And one of the other peoples that lives in this area, and we think probably descended from the same groups of people as the Navajo, are the Zuni. The Zuni live around sort of the southern part of the Colorado River. And in the Zuni creation myth, originally human beings were sort of misshapen. They had a really weird shape, and they lived in a world that was dark. They couldn't, see. They couldn't really do much of anything. So it wasn't a good time for them. And into this problem comes the sun. So the sun is sort of a godlike figure, and he took pity on humans, and he decided to help them out. So he sent his own children to help the human beings out, these early human beings. He sent his two sons. So he had the sons of the sun helping out. And the sons of the sun said, hey, listen, proto-humans, you need to get out of this world. You need to get to someplace better. So they guided humans to climb up a pine tree, which must have been really hard with the shape that humans were at the time. But they managed to get all the humans to climb to the top of this pine tree. They broke through a crack at the top of the sky, and they emerged into another world. And they indeed did this multiple times. I think it's as many as 4 times. Let's see. Oh yes, so they actually repeated the process multiple times, and the sun brought them out of the last world. And in the last world, they finally end up in our world. So this is a much better situation, and the sun is of course there because this is his world. So he's already got that part of things taken care of. But human beings are still having a hard time in this new world. They lack a lot of physical features, for instance, fingers, toes, mouths, and anuses. So they can't really eat, and they can't grab things. They can see now because there's some light. But they're still in trouble. So the sons of the sun say, okay, we're going to carve you into a better shape, like we're carving wood. So they do that. They cut mouths, and then they realize people are going to need the other part as well. So they carve anuses, and then they carve fingers and toes. And then they get rid of the horns and the tails that human beings have. And then now human beings are the shape that we know today, and they can do all sorts of useful things. And the sons of the sun say, oh yeah, we want to create useful body features for humans. The useful is a very important word for them. And so they eventually help the Zuni find a place to settle. And they call this the middle of the world. And the middle of the world is basically where the Zuni finally settled and is known as their homeland. And that's a large part of a lot of these stories as well, is finding a homeland. Similarly, in Hopi mythology, we again have an appearance of the sun. In this case, he isn't the one who guides people to the new world. He is just the creator of the 4 worlds. So we've got the 4 worlds, and Tawa the sun created them. And again, people are led to emerge from the underground. But in this case, it's a figure known as Spider Grandmother. So spiders are often trickster figures or sort of heroic or significant figures. And Spider Grandmother decides to help the people get to the next world. And so she leads them all the way up. And I want to say that it is, there's also a spider who appears in the Zuni myth, although not quite in the same role. I want to say Spider Grandmother leads people up a web, but I'm not 100% sure there. Let's see. It doesn't really say in the source that we have here, which is kind of a summary of it. But we do again have that element of human beings starting off a weird shape. We think the Hopi and the Zuni were pretty closely connected there because of this. So human beings start off as a weird shape and lose their horns, their tails, and their webbed fingers. And people in this story, they start off as insects. but they go through all sort of the different shapes of different animals and then finally end up as people. And as they go from world to world, they finally end up in one which has more light. So each world is brighter than the last. But they still want a sun and moon, so they make them out of leather stretched over wood like a drum, and they paint them, and then they sing them into the sky. And again, here comes Coyote. Coyote paints the stars. He just takes paint instead of stones, and he just sort of throws the paint everywhere and splatters it like a Jackson Pollock painting. And then he has established, again, these randomly selected stars, which I don't know about you guys, but this whole Coyote and randomness thing reminds me a lot of Raven with the random rivers. And in fact, there are stories about Raven doing like random stars in the sky as well. Some other interesting details, they end up creating mountains by playing ball games. The balls just knock a whole bunch of earth around and create the mountains. And then they choose their clans by choosing from different corn cobs. So they use corn cobs to determine who will go where. And that's kind of the origin of things in Hopi society. Okay, two more I want to look into. Now we're going to go a bit further away from the Southwest. We're going to go all the way to the east, to the area of the Iroquois. Now, there's the Iroquois were a tribe in sort of the New England area, still are really, but they are also the name of an alliance of tribes, the Iroquois Confederacy, which includes other tribes like the Seneca. So a lot of those cultures kind of decided to band together and had a lot in common. And so this creation myth, I think specifically comes from the classic Iroquois, but if we were to hear the stories of other members of that group, we would hear probably pretty similar stories. And in fact, the book presents multiple versions of this story. But see what you think of this in comparison to the other emergence myth. So once upon a time, there was the Sky World and our world. And in the Sky World, everything was beautiful and peaceful, but there ended up being a bit of a fight among the inhabitants of the Sky World. And the chief was supposed to place his daughter, let his daughter sleep in a specific location, and also dig up this tree that was there. And so he dug up the tree and that made a hole. But another of the sky people was upset with him for this, that he liked the tree and did not want to see it uprooted. So he pushed the leader's daughter down the hole. And this daughter was known as Sky Woman. And so Sky Woman fell from her beautiful paradisical world into our world. Now at this time, there was no land, it was all water. So this was, quite clearly a problem for her. So she was kind of splashing around and treading water. And so the different inhabitants of the water decided what they were going to do about this. And they basically voted to let turtle or tortoise take care of it. And so this giant turtle came up out of the water and made a safe place for her to land. And the other inhabitants of the sea, they went and they gathered dirt and they put it on the back of Turtle. And eventually Turtle's back became a continent, and that became North America as we know it today. So then Sky Woman was there on Turtle's back in North America, and she gave birth to sons. Well, actually, she gave birth, depends on the story, but in some versions, she gives birth to a daughter, and then her daughter gives birth to twin sons. So this is interesting. It's an asexual reproduction. There's no, partner required here, even though as we go further on in the Greek story, a partner is required. And even though partners seem to be required in like the Navajo story, we don't see that here. So Sky Woman's grandchildren are these twins. And the twins kind of shape the rest of the land into its current shape, or they create other lands. And more importantly, they create the animals. Now, one twin is very nice, and he was born the normal way, and he creates helpful, tasty creatures, like animals that are so fat and delicious that you can hunt them very easily and have a good meal out of them. And then the other one creates harmful creatures, and he's kind of evil. He's not really the god of evil. I think that's a misinterpretation, but he's a god who is sort of cold-hearted or mischievous, and he creates animals that try to kill you, like scorpions and things like that. And so the good twin and the evil twin, they have a battle, and eventually the good twin slays the evil one. And from there, the descendants of humanity arise from the twins. And again, we see the origins of the sun and the moon. In this case, the sun and the moon are a banished old woman and old man. The old man, let's see, I forget what was his reason for being banished. Let's see. He was just, yeah, it just says he was rejected by his people. So he decided to climb up a mountain, and then he started chanting, and he slowly rose into the air and became the moon. Let's see. Oh, no. Well, in some stories, he's a constellation. In some stories, he's the sun. But then an old woman becomes the moon, and it is because she is a prophet. But she was unhappy because she could not predict when the world was going to end. So she was transported to the moon, and so she is somehow being punished for trying to predict the future. So that's kind of interesting too. Again, we see the idea that people might be behind the existence of the sun and the moon, as we had with like the young man and the old man. So that's pretty interesting. And there's a lot of variations on this story, but very often involves a woman falling from the sky and everybody kind of being descended from her. And so the fact here that we have like the two worlds, we have like a world that's in the sky, that's very interesting, but it's being interpreted in a very different way, and we're going down instead of going up. Then finally, the last one I want to mention is the Aztec creation myth. And the Aztec creation myth, there were 4 different ages of the world, and the world kept getting created and destroyed. And so again, you know, we have the 4 previous worlds, but this time we are on the 5th world. And so what happened to each of the worlds, there were various problems, like for instance, mass flooding, great fires. But one kind of recurring problem is that the sun is likely to burn out. So there's a big concern there about the sun going out. And so to create the 5th world, the gods decided to sacrifice one of themselves. And so they sacrificed one of their number on a bonfire. And one guy volunteered. He was Nanahuatzin. And Nanahuatzin, he was willing to set himself on fire, which was a very good self-sacrificing thing to do, a very brave thing to do. And so this burning man became the sun. And then another guy said, okay, well, you've inspired me. And this was Tetzcoatl. And Tetzcoatl did the same, and there wasn't as much fire that time, so he became the moon. And one of the ideas here is that the 5th sun is the sun of our world, and it sort of establishes the order of the world, but it will only last as long as human beings make sacrifices to the gods. And in the original Aztec tradition, this is human sacrifices, usually of prisoners of war, people who were captured in the wars that the Aztecs had, not just members of their own people. And so the idea is if the human sacrifices stop, the 5th sun will go out, and then we'll really be in trouble. So this is a justification to keep that going. And what I find interesting is that, again, we have the similar element of multiple sort of ages of the world, and you know, the creation and destruction of the world. But it's a different interpretation of things than we saw with the emergence myth. It's not sort of moving between different worlds. It's the idea of the world being destroyed over and over again. And in that sense, it reminds me almost of the sort of ages of humanity, the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Hero Age, and Iron Age that we saw in the works of Hesiod, and so on. So that's kind of interesting too. So maybe there is a connection between the multiple stages of the world and the Southwestern cultures, and even the sort of maybe even the Eastern American culture of the Iroquois. We think there are probably connections at least between the different Southwestern cultures and possibly the Iroquois and the Southwestern culture as well. It's very possible also that some of these ideas could have been spread by trade because people weren't completely isolated. They moved around and they were able to communicate ideas to each other. Okay, So that's our little look into sort of the creation myths of the Americas. In the next video, what I want to do is go to think about creation myths in general. And so we'll look at a few different creation myths around the world, and we'll see if we can find common features of creation myths. And that's going to be what you guys are going to be writing about for your sort of mini paper that's coming up. So I'll see you in the next video.